In autumn 2012, I travelled with my wife Helene through the Indian Thar Desert, the area of western Rajasthan near the border with Pakistan. We drove from Bikaner south towards Jaisalmer, and after 32 kilometres we took a small detour from the main road to visit Gajner Palace, the former hunting lodge of the Maharaja of Bikaner, which is now operated as an upmarket hotel. The palace was primarily a hunting resort during the days of the British Raj and attracted several dignitaries, including the Prince of Wales in 1905. When constructing Gajner, Maharaja Ganga Singh built a dike to create a lake which attracted the game that he and his guests used to hunt. This is probably the oldest lake in the area, and the acacia forest around it provides good ground for breeding resident waterfowl, and in winter, large number of ducks join the resident birds to feast on the good food source. It's said that black-bellied sandgrouse come to drink here in winter. We did not see any, but were rewarded with these excellent shots of a drinking Eurasian sparrowhawk and a spotted redshank catching a frog. The former hunting ground of the Maharaja is now a wildlife sanctuary, with black buck and nilgai or blue bull that have very little fear of people. We continued south on National Highway 15 to Phalodi, and the next morning went 10 kilometres off the main road to visit Kichan village, where one of the most spectacular avian sights in India can be seen. Every morning between November and February, thousands of demoiselle cranes gather in a small enclosure on the outskirts of the village, where they are fed with grain. This phenomenon has been going on now for 40 years and is run by a local NGO founded by Ratanlal Malu. The number of cranes has increased through the years and now is around 15,000. Thousands of kilos of grains are needed to feed these birds, and donations are welcomed. It's very important that birders, both Indians and foreigners, visit this place for moral and financial support, as this NGO is fighting many legal cases against the government and others who want to put an end to their activity. Demoiselle cranes, or kurja as it's known locally, is one of the smallest cranes. They breed in Central Asia from the Black Sea to Mongolia and China. In autumn, they migrate south, crossing the Himalayan mountains to their winter grounds in northwest India and Pakistan. They can be easily seen all over western Rajasthan and Gujarat, especially near water sources. We reached Jaisalmer later that day. It was Diwali, the Indian New Year, and the city was packed with tourists, mainly from Gujarat, the big industrial state south of Rajasthan. Most hotels were fully booked, but we managed to find a room for a night in Hotel Raika Palace, where I had stayed in a previous visit. Jaisalmer is dominated by a fort, which stands on an 80-metre-high yellow sandstone hill, with a 360-degree view over the surroundings. The walls are massive and have 99 bastions around their circumference. It's changed little since it was built in 1156 by the Rajput king Maharaja Rawal Jaisal. It's the only city left in Rajasthan that has more than a quarter of its population living within the old walls. It's fascinating to wander around the narrow streets of the old city, honeycombed with narrow winding lanes, all of them paved in stone and with a remarkably efficient drainage system that keeps them free of excrement and effluent. Jaisalmer is sometimes called the Golden City of India because everything is built from Jaisalmer stone, which has an orange-yellowish colour and is now exported, rivaling other stones like onyx and marble in popularity. The fort is entered through a series of massive gates leading to a large courtyard. Here is where the former Maharaja's 7-storey palace stands. The square, formerly used to review troops, is now a car park for taxis and rickshaws, and is the last place where motor vehicles are allowed inside the city walls. There's a group of beautifully carved Jain temples within the fort, as well as Shiva and Ganesh temples. Most of the houses have souvenir and handicraft shops on their ground floors, and many are now operating as guest houses and restaurants. Jaisalmer is the only city in India that kept its tradition of masonry and architecture alive. New buildings are built in the traditional way, using only the Jaisalmer stone as building material. The art of stone carving is preserved, and most new hotels look just like the Havelis, the old palaces of medieval times. On the outskirts of town, on the road towards Sam Dune, you can find a few new upmarket hotels resembling old palaces. For birdwatchers, Jaisalmer is the gateway to Desert National Park, the best place for Indian bustard and other desert birds. There's no need anymore for a special permit to visit the park and the surrounding area. The park's headquarters are a little over an hour's drive from the city, and desert birds can be seen shortly after the massive 5-star Suryagarh Fort Hotel, 10 minutes drive out of town. You will need a vehicle to travel around. You can hire a taxi or jeep, but I recommend hiring a motorbike for self-drive. There are a few dealers near the fort parking that rent bikes for 300 to 600 rupees per day. You have to leave a deposit. Don't worry about a driving license. Nobody else does. We had to leave our hotel the next day, as it was fully booked with Gujarati tourists, and on the afternoon of November 16th we drove towards Sam. We went off the road after 23 kilometers, near a place where Jaisalmer's special adventure sports take place. Tourists are tied to a parachute pulled by a jeep and get the feeling of flying for a few moments. 800 meters further on, we reached an old waterhole with a little stone pavilion and a few old trees, an excellent place for camping. We decided to wait until dark before putting up the tent so as not to draw unnecessary attention. Here we encountered our first desert birds, with desert lark giving a superb view, and, before dark, a pair of Eurasian eagle owls. We got up early and watched the sunrise, which at this time of the year is a little before 7 a.m. We drank coffee and waited for sand grouses and other birds to come to drink at the waterhole. I had much expectation from this waterhole as, judging by the trees around it, it must be very old and had probably been built by the Maharaja for the benefit of the local shepherds. But soon we realized that there was not much activity. We decided to move on before the adventure sport types arrived with their parachutes, so we broke camp, packed the tent and drove on towards Sam. A few hundred meters further, on a dirt road parallel to the main road, we stopped to inspect a pair of pipit-like birds, and I soon realized I was watching a pair of greater hoopoe larks as they foraged by walking and running, or walking in spurts, probing and digging the ground. We drove on and joined the main road, and a few hundred meters further we saw a concrete pool of fresh water, with the water overflowing and pouring onto the ground, creating small pools. A few bushes and small trees that had provided shelter made it a favourite place for birds to come to drink and wash. The birds obviously preferred the fresh water of this tank to the standing water from the monsoon in the old waterhole where we'd been camping. A local man who lives in a hut about 150 meters away came to fetch water from the tank, and I realized that the birds here are very tolerant of people. They fly off at any disturbance, but come back very quickly, and if you move slowly, you can get very close. After about an hour of filming, a herd of goats came to drink, and the shepherd, after inquiring about our doings, suggested that we drive for another 2 kilometers south of the road to a place where there's a small water reservoir. We drove past a tiny village and a little agricultural patch, and were happy to find the reservoir with a few waders and ducks. I was very happy to hear the familiar call of chestnut-bellied sand grouse. A few flocks were flying around and finally landed to drink. Although later we found many places with water, this was the only place we found sand grouse drinking. The place looked ideal for camping, so we decided to come back in the evening. Back on the road to Sam, and a few kilometers more north of the main road near Kanoi village, I noticed a few vultures in the air. Coming closer, I saw some on the trees near the village well. We drove off the road towards the circling birds and found the carcass of a cow with vultures around. There were about 50 white-rumped, 15 griffon, 4 cinereous and 7 Egyptian vultures, completely ignoring the village women who passed by with jars of water on their way from the well to the village. Oriental white-rumped vultures, together with Indian and slender-billed vultures, were numbered around 1 million birds only 20 years ago. I remember back in 1987 when I first came to India, seeing around 100 vultures on a carcass in the middle of the road in front of New Delhi railway station, with the traffic flowing by on both sides. Now, these vultures are extinct around Delhi and are critically endangered worldwide, with only a few thousand birds left. These species have suffered a 99% population decrease in India and nearby countries since the early 1990s. The decline has been widely attributed to poisoning by diclofenac, which is used as a veterinary non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, leaving traces in cattle carcasses which, when fed on, leads to kidney failure in vultures. The drug is now banned in India, but is still used as a painkiller for humans. It is still available in pharmacies and thus still used by farmers. Desert National Park is one of the last strongholds of white-rumped vultures, and it's important to protect the birds by providing them with carcasses free of diclofenac. Vulture restaurants are a simple idea. Providing vultures with food has saved vultures in many places in the world, such as in South Africa, where it brought the Cape vulture back from the brink of extinction. By now it was lunchtime. It was getting hot, so we left the vultures and drove on. Shortly after Kanoi village, Sam Dune starts. This is a very large sand dune that stretches for about 5 kilometers south of the road. This dune is the main tourist attraction around Jaisalmer, and many tourists drive there from the city in the evening to watch the sunset. However, the real thing with Gujarati tourists is to stay a night in the desert. Parallel to the dune on the north side of the road, a city of tents emerged. There were dozens of camps, each with dozens of tents, where a bed with simple vegetarian meals goes for around 2,500 rupees per night. You may be able to negotiate a cheaper deal, but not at this time of year, as the Diwali holidays in Gujarat stretch over 2 weeks, and the camps are usually fully booked. Later in the afternoon, after a long lunch break during which I managed to charge batteries and download the film from camera to computer, we went back to Kanoi village to watch the vultures. By then, most of them had gone and only a few ravens and house crows were around, together with a dog and a cow that gave a very surrealistic view. A family of peafowls went by, and by following them we discovered the village well, which is more than half a kilometre from the village itself. In this part of the world, it's the women's duty to go and fetch water. I was rather surprised to see that in such a big village, the government has not established water tanks. Water is not any more an issue in the Indian Thar Desert, as plenty of water is diverted there in open canals from the Beas River, from Pong Dam in Himachal Pradesh. Before evening, we went back to the water reservoir where we'd seen the sand grouse earlier that morning. As we arrived, we saw a few ducks and waders fly away as 2 men brought their camels down to drink. After they left, I located a nice place between large trees to put up the tent. We watched the sunset, and after a dinner of biscuits and fruit, we camped for a second night. Next morning was cloudy with haze in the air, and we could not see much of the sunrise. We drank coffee and ate breakfast and sat and waited for about an hour for birds to come. There was not much activity early in the morning, and when a man came with a tractor to pump out water from the reservoir, we realized it was time to move on. We decided to try and get early to the area of Indian Bustard in Desert National Park, which lay about 20 kilometers after Sam Dune, next to the park headquarters in Sudaseri. Near the dune, we stopped to buy water and snacks. By now, a new business day was starting in the tent city. The local people of the desert were all over the place with their camels, trying to get the Gujaratis to go for a camel ride on the dune. We drove on, and towards the end of the dune, next to a well-forested area, we stopped to film a small group of cream-coloured coursers that were foraging not far from the last camp. Sam village is not far from the end of the dune. Although it's the largest village around and has some shops, there's not much there for tourists to be concerned with. To get to Desert National Park, you have to turn left on the first asphalt road in the village, as there are no signs to give directions. The last houses in the village looked like the park headquarters, as they did have signs of Indian Bustard and a map. But we found out that in fact the headquarters has shifted 15 kilometers onward to Sudaseri. However, the park officially begins here. The landscape is flat, partly grassland and partly agricultural. On the left, the area is fenced where domestic animals are not allowed. This has resulted in an almost luxuriant growth of grasses, which is not an ideal landscape for Indian Bustard. The power lines next to the road are very good for raptors that feed on lizards and gerbils. Try to get here early and drive slowly. Stop from time to time and scan, as in this area you should encounter most desert birds. There's not much in Sudaseri except for the park headquarters. The watchtower on the right is a significant landmark, and if you reach it, it means that you've driven too far and should trace back a few hundred meters. There are a few round huts and square buildings which are the park headquarters. It may take time before you find somebody to assist you, as there are not many visitors to this place. There's a small museum with drawings of the local birds, and huts that can be rented for a day for 500 rupees. It was not clear if it was possible to stay overnight, as the forest officer was not there. The huts looked very pleasant, with double beds and attached bathrooms. Here, in the headquarters, you have to pay your entrance fee. 20 rupees for Indians and 160 for foreigners. 200 rupees for a vehicle and 200 rupees for a guide. I'm not sure if a guide is compulsory, but driving off-road, it's very easy to get lost, and you certainly need one if you want to find the rare Indian bustard. Another way to see the desert is with a camel that pulls a cart, an activity which is also organised in the park headquarters. The watchtower a few hundred metres away is a good place to scan for bustards. We could not locate any, but saw a male Montagu's harrier. A little further down the road, we turned off the asphalt to the right and drove around searching. This area is flat and grassy, with many small trees scattered around. There are a few shepherds' settlements with many goats and cows. The area is very good for Indian gazelles and raptors. We saw long-legged buzzard, lagar falcon, tawny eagle, and an adult imperial eagle. The ground is full of holes dug by gerbils, the main food source for raptors. By now it was close to midday. It started getting hot, and the haze that came from the ground made conditions difficult for filming. I was about to give up when the guide located a female Indian bustard. We got closer for a better shot, but the bird kept retreating from us until it finally took off and disappeared. Desert National Park is one of the biggest parks in India at about 3,000 square kilometers. It was formed mainly to protect the Indian bustard, Godawan in Rajasthani, which together with the African Kori bustard is the biggest flying bird in the world. While the Kori bustard is doing well in the vast African grasslands, the Indian bustard is on the brink of extinction. The bird's not hunted, and habitat loss is the main reason for its decline. Nearly all the grassland in India has been converted into agriculture, and the birds find it hard to raise their young in this new habitat. It was once distributed all over India south of the Ganges River, but now, with less than 300 birds remaining, Desert National Park is their main stronghold, with 240 birds at the last count. Later in the afternoon, we drove back to Jaisalmer. The weekend was over, and the current wave of Gujarati tourists was on their way home. We found a room in Mystic Hotel that has a parking place, and after long negotiation, agreed to pay 1,000 rupees for a double room. This hotel, like many others in the city, is new, but built in an old style and resembles an old Haveli of days gone by. It's only a few minutes' walk from Jaisalmer's main shopping and restaurant area. It has a rooftop restaurant with a great view over the fort and the old city, and is a good place for travellers to hang around. We stayed there 2 nights. I had a lot of work, charging batteries, downloading the material from the camera to the computer, and naming all the shots. Next morning I went to Jaisalmer Fossil Park, 15 kilometers south of the city on the main road to Barma. It's officially part of Desert National Park and was formed to protect tree fossils. These had become badly damaged, but now each fossil has its own cage. A compound wall protects the park. There's no grazing and very little disturbance. The road goes on for a few hundred meters more, and then you have to turn off and drive for a few hundred meters until you reach the fossils. The landscape here is very different from the flat, sandy area around Sam and Sudaseri. It's hillier with rocks and scrub forests similar to that found in other parts of India. The area is good for house buntings and other birds that are not found in other parts of the park. Near the entrance gate, the watchman has established a water drinking point for birds. Every day he takes care to put fresh water in broken clay pots that serve perfectly as bird baths. Here in his office you pay your entrance fee, 20 rupees per person and 10 for the car. He's very interested to entertain bird watchers and will probably invite you for a cup of tea. He showed me some very interesting wasps that nest on the hut of the local museum. This area of the fossil park is a heaven for photographers, as they can present themselves very near the water plates with the sun at their backs. It's a bird concert next to the water plates, only, sadly, being so close to the main road, the sound of traffic passing by is unavoidable. Our visit to the Indian Thar Desert had come to its end, and on the morning of 20th of November, we started on our 3-day journey back home to Goa. On the way, about halfway between Jaisalmer and Barmer, we stopped at a wetland. Battling strong winds that shook the tripod, I filmed this magnificent collection of waterbirds.